Welcome to Sib Spot. Today's featured Reddit stories are from MaliciousCompliance. Story 1 is by Creative Nemo. The $500,000 compliance fiasco. I work as a senior compliance officer in a large multinational corporation that operates in highly regulated industries. My job is to ensure that we meet all regulatory requirements across different markets. It's a complex job, but after 15 years in the industry, I've seen it all. Or so I thought. Our company recently brought in a new CFO, Julia, who was determined to cut costs across the board. She was a numbers person through and through, and in her mind, compliance was a bloated department that could easily be trimmed down. We had several meetings where she'd question every expense, every process, every role. It was clear that she didn't understand the intricacies of compliance and didn't care to learn. One day, Julia called me into her office and told me that my team was too expensive and that I needed to lay off 30% of my staff. I tried to explain that each person on my team was responsible for managing compliance in different jurisdictions, and cutting staff would put the company at risk of non-compliance, leading to fines or worse, but Julia was having none of it. "We're overstaffed. Make it work or I'll find someone who can," she said. Seeing no other option, I complied. I made the layoffs, reluctantly letting go some of my most experienced staff. But I knew that this was a ticking time bomb. A few months later, our company was bidding for a massive contract with a government entity worth $500 million. Winning this contract would be a game changer, and the pressure was on to ensure everything was in order. Julia was leading the charge, but the timelines were tight, and we had to submit all compliance documentation within a week. Here's where things got interesting. One of the key compliance documents required for the bid involved an obscure regulation in a small market we operated in. Let's call it Country X. The regulation was something that only one of the laid-off team members, a guy named Peter, had handled. The documentation needed his specific knowledge and a set of reports that were saved on his company-issued laptop, which had been returned and promptly wiped after his departure. Julia, not understanding the gravity of the situation, assumed that this was a minor hiccup and ordered me to just find the reports or recreate them. But the process wasn't that simple. The reports were generated through a custom-built tool that Peter had developed over years, and there was no way to replicate them without his expertise. I calmly explained this to Julia, who then realized the severity of the situation. Desperate, Julia asked me to contact Peter and see if he could help us out as a consultant. I reached out to Peter, who was understandably bitter about his sudden layoff, but willing to listen for the right price. I reported back to Julia that Peter was willing to assist, but he was asking for a 6-figure consulting fee. Julia balked at the cost, but realized she had no choice. Peter was the only person who could get us the documents we needed to comply with the regulations in Country X. Peter returned, and within 2 days he produced the necessary reports. However, when Julia submitted the bid, it was too late. The delays caused by the scramble had already set us back, and the contract went to a competitor who had everything in order on time. The fallout was significant. The company lost out on a $500,000 deal, and the board of directors was furious. Julia's cost-cutting measures, which had seemed so effective on paper, had directly led to this catastrophic loss. The kicker? Peter's consulting fee and the cost of cleaning up the compliance mess afterward were more than double the savings Julia had achieved by laying off my team. And as for me, the board decided that compliance was too important to be left to the whims of someone who didn't understand it. Julia was quietly let go, and I was promoted to a new role, head of global risk management, with a mandate to ensure that nothing like this ever happened again. I made sure to hire Peter back on a full-time basis with a significant raise. We never spoke of the incident again, but I made it a point to always remind my team that their work, though often invisible, was invaluable. And from then on, compliance was never taken for granted. There's so many stories like this where a new manager comes in, some new higher-up person who's your boss, and they tell you to cut corners and cut back on costs. No matter what, we need to cut back on costs. They come in, but that is their goal when they come in, is to show how much money they can save the business. We don't need these things, let's cut costs, and it always backfires. Like, why would she not defer to this guy's expertise? He's the head of the compliance division, and he was told to lay people off. You can't show off to your company if you're causing them to lose $500 million in revenue. Our next story is by Mel MN 2002. Melmn 2002. No assistant for you. I am an account for a software. I think they mean accountant here. They just said an account. As far as I know, you can't be an account, but maybe there's a situation where you can be. I am an accountant for a software as a service company that tends to have some interesting ideas on how business should run. SaaS. We did about $30 million in revenue when this issue came up, with myself as the only biller, issuing over 1,000 invoices every month, the bulk of which needed to be sent by business day 5. I'd asked repeatedly for an assistant specifically for the billing process, and in turn got someone for collections, which I kinda casually had been doing by myself, and managed a 45 DSO. For revenue posting, which wasn't my purpose anyway, and for payroll, which I was doing because we literally had no one else, but no assistant budget could be found, per the CFO. My supervisor, the controller, consistently tried to get me one, but was always denied every time she and I asked. One lovely day, we got a new product, Adobe Sign. Our clients can now send documents to their clients or talent for a low price of exorbitant rate of tiered bundles. I was supposed to get a report of how many packages were signed and then compare to what they were being billed and float up to a higher tier if they used more than they were contracted for 2 months in a row. This worked okay for the first few months. When only 100 or so clients used the product and I received a summary report of usage, but after those few months, the summary report stopped and adoption exponentially grew. By April 2020, I was receiving a 1 million row spreadsheet, plus 2 other supplementary sheets that had 0 key identifiers, but no other instruction on how to complete my job. I repeatedly told my supervisor that this wasn't feasible in the long run, and I couldn't figure out how to calculate float-ups, but she was distracted with other things. Hi, 2020, and told me to figure it out. What I figured out is my need for an assistant was imperative now, and I literally couldn't do my job as is. So I didn't. 0 float-ups from April to October 2020. Come October, sales, account management, and the C-suite finally figured out that Adobe revenue is lower than they expect based on usage. I repeated my complaint that I couldn't get everything done with the data they gave me. Adobe data was the least of the missing or incomplete data, to be frank. Without losing in particular Adobe float-ups, and everything hits the fan. The CFO demanded a full documentation of the billing process because finance can't be losing so much revenue. Read, why are you guys, and specifically me, effing up? I just smiled, nodded, and agreed to comply with an outside auditor documenting my billing process to find my holes. In the 4-month process that took about 2 weeks out of every month, I described my process down to the nitty-gritty detail, up to and including the fact that A. I did not have a summarized user log. I got an 18,000-line user listing that I had to comb through for duplicates, since 60% of our clients used 2 of our platforms and we didn't, and still don't, have single sign-on, SSO, and then pivot out and associate with each client manually via lookup against a non-key identifier, manually entered into Salesforce, SFDC. B. There was no database for which add-on services our clients were using, and our metadata platform, AMP, was just a manual checkbox for each client, and each service upkept the client's account manager. C. AMP had no reporting functionality to audit client usage versus contracted usage versus billed usage. D. There is more, but I think you get the picture. When the outside consultant gave her report to my supervisor and the CFO, the call was quiet for a long bit. Then the CFO said thank you and disconnected. About 15 minutes later, I get a direct Teams video call from the CFO. Melman 2002, he said, I want to apologize. The fact that company is still a going concern at all is a testament to your hard work. What you have done with the crappy data you've been given is nothing short of amazing. Thank you. Slightly paraphrased, of course, but that was the general gist. The going concern part, though, direct quote. See, that was my confusion about this. What does it mean that company is still a going concern? I've never heard that phrase before. I thought this person made an error, and I was going to restate it in a way that's more understandable, but I don't know what it means to say the company is still a going concern. I'm going to defer to the pros out there that know more about grammar than I do. The next business day, an ad was placed for an assistant for me and the SFDC deal desk manager. I haven't had to answer my phone or dig in customer emails in 3+ years. I love my assistant and I am so glad to have her. She makes my work life 1,000,000 times better. See, this story right here, I feel like this is more true than most of the ones that I read because there's so many technical details and things that I generally am not familiar with in it. There's a lot of stories that I read and come across on Reddit that are very cookie cutter, and there's been some speculation that a lot of these stories are just, invented, that some of these stories are trying to shape public opinion. This one, I am sure, is true, because it's not cookie cutter at all. There's all these details and all these terminologies that I've never heard of before that sound very authentic. What I'm talking about with the other ones, you always hear about this Karen or this kid stormed off to their room or stormed off down the hall. They always use the word stormed. I have a feeling that a lot of the stormed off ones are faked. I could be wrong, and it could just be that a lot of people that write stories read about stormed off, and they like the usage of that phrase, but it does make me wonder, because a lot of them do feel very cookie cutter, and there's no technicality in it at all. But sometimes removing the technicalities makes them easier to understand. This last one was a little confusing because I don't know a lot of that stuff. But I did major in computer information systems and we dealt with databases and whatnot. So it does sound believable to me, but there's definitely some more newer things that they're using in here that I'm not familiar with. But to me, it just sounds like they were trying to make this person do miracles with very little. And it sounds like they were a miracle worker, honestly. Our stories for today have come to a close. Until we meet again, have a wonderful day.